The starship Voyager wind moved through the silent darkness of space, its silver hull shining against the light of distant suns. It was on a journey to a new and unexplored planet called Corin. The mission was peaceful. The crew had been sent to study the planet's plants, animals, and atmosphere. For many months they had traveled, and now the long journey was ending. Among the crew was Raylan, a human botanist. He loved plants, not only for their beauty, but also for the way they could survive in the harshest places. Raylan believed that plants often held secrets about the worlds they lived on. He had studied plants from over 20 different planets, yet he was eager to see what Corin had to offer. Beside Raylan was Leora, a young alien girl from the Virian race. The Virian were gentle people with soft, shining skin and large bright eyes. They were not warriors or fighters. They were healers, gardeners, and dreamers. Leora had joined the crew to learn more about human science. She admired the way humans faced danger without fear. Raylan admired her curiosity and her ability to notice details others missed. The day of arrival came. The crew gathered in the control room as the planet grew larger on the viewing screen. Corin was a green and blue world with wide forests and shining lakes. Great patches of colorful land showed where giant flowers might be blooming. Clouds drifted slowly across the surface, and the sunlight made the whole planet seem alive. Captain Morrow gave the order to prepare for landing. The ship entered the atmosphere, passing through layers of soft clouds. The engines hummed as the ship slowed. Everyone watched from the viewing windows as the surface came into view. Below them stretched endless fields of plants, taller than trees back on Earth. Some leaves were wide enough to hold a small boat. Some flowers were so large that birds could rest in their petals. The landing site was chosen on a flat area near a small lake. The ground there was covered in short grass-like plants that swayed gently in the wind. The air shimmered in the heat of the sun. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and the crew prepared to step outside. When the hatch opened, warm air rushed in, carrying the scent of flowers, leaves, and something sweet they could not name. It was unlike any smell they had known before. Raylan stepped out first, holding his scanner. Leora followed, her eyes wide with wonder. Round them rose tall green stems that swayed even though there was little wind. Strange bird-like creatures with silver feathers flew overhead. Small insect-like beings with glowing wings darted through the air. Raylan knelt to study a plant near the hatch. Its stem was thick, almost like a tree trunk, but its leaves were thin and soft. Folding when touched, he made a note on his device. Leora was drawn to a patch of flowers with petals shaped like stars. They changed color slowly, turning from blue to yellow to red in a gentle rhythm. "This place feels alive," Leora said quietly. Raylan agreed. "Everything here seems to move, even the plants." The rest of the crew set up equipment to test the air, water, and soil. The readings showed that the air was safe to breathe, and the water was fresh. The captain allowed them to explore in pairs but told them to stay within sight of the landing site. Raylan and Leora walked toward a cluster of plants with enormous blossoms. Each blossom was large enough for a person to stand inside. The petals were bright gold with streaks of green, and the centers glowed softly in the sunlight. The plants gave off a steady hum, like the low sound of distant machines. "They are beautiful," Leora whispered, stepping closer. Raylan studied them with a mix of fascination and caution. He had learned that beauty in nature often hid danger. Some of the most deadly plants in the galaxy had the brightest colors. He scanned the plant's surface, but found nothing unusual, no signs of poison or harmful gas. Still, something about the steady hum made him uneasy. Leora, curious as always, leaned forward to look into the heart of one of the blossoms. Inside, she saw what looked like tiny sparkling dust floating in the air. The dust seemed to move in patterns, almost as if it were alive. She reached out her hand, but stopped just before touching it. "Careful," Raylan said. "I will not touch," she replied with a small smile. The ground under their feet was soft and slightly warm, almost like it was alive too. A few meters away, one of the blossoms moved slightly. Its petals twitched, then slowly began to fold inward. Raylan noticed this and frowned. "Leora, step back," he said. She looked at him, puzzled, and then glanced back at the blossom in front of her. It was still open, glowing gently in the sunlight. She did not see any danger, so she took one more step closer to look at the glowing dust inside. At that moment, a shadow passed over them. Raylan looked up and saw the petals beginning to move, not just the one she was near, but several others as well. The hum grew louder. The stems bent slightly toward them. Raylan felt his heartbeat quicken. Something was not right. He reached out and gently pulled Leora by the arm. "We should return to the ship," he said firmly. She nodded, but looked back once more at the glowing petals. "They are unlike anything I have seen," she murmured. As they began walking back toward the landing site, the wind seemed to shift. The scent of sweetness grew stronger. It was pleasant, almost too pleasant, like it was trying to keep them near. Raylan felt the pull of it, but forced himself to focus on the path. The rest of the crew was busy collecting samples when Raylan and Leora returned. He told the captain about the moving petals and the strange hum. The captain agreed they should keep a safe distance until more could be learned still. Raylan could not shake the feeling that the golden blossoms were not just plants. They seemed aware, almost watching, waiting. Leora's gaze drifted back toward the grove, and for a moment she thought she saw the petals shift again, like a slow breath. The day passed with the crew working under the warm sun. They collected leaves, seeds, and water samples. They recorded animal calls and patterns in the sky. But Raylan's thoughts kept returning to the golden blossoms and the strange feeling they gave him. As the sun lowered, the light turned golden, matching the petals in the distance. The hum from the grove seemed to grow softer, blending with the natural sounds of the world. The crew prepared for night, setting up lights round the ship. Raylan stood by the hatch, looking at the grove one last time before going inside. In the fading light, the blossoms looked still and peaceful, yet deep inside, he felt they were not done with him or Leora. Morning came to Corn with a warm light that spilled over the forest and fields. The air carried the same sweet scent as before, but it seemed stronger in the early hours. The crew stepped outside to begin another day of exploration. Their boots pressed into the soft ground, and the leaves overhead swayed gently even without much wind. Raylan moved with his usual focus, scanning each plant he passed. Leora followed close behind, her steps light, her eyes constantly moving from one detail to another. She pointed out insects with crystal-like wings, vines that seemed to change shade depending on the angle of the sun, and pools of water that reflected more colors than a rainbow. The captain had assigned the crew in pairs again. Raylan and Leora were free to explore the area east of the landing site. The path led them through a patch of tall grasses and toward the grove of golden blossoms they had seen the day before. The petals were shining even brighter now, glowing softly like a lantern in the mist. Raylan stopped at the edge of the grove. He remembered how the plants had moved before, how the petals had twitched, how the stems had leaned. His mind told him to be cautious, but the beauty of the blossoms made it difficult to turn away. "We will not go too close," he said. Leora nodded, though her eyes stayed fixed on the largest flower. The center of its petals pulsed slowly, and the glowing dust inside shifted in graceful swirls. It was almost like it was inviting her closer. Raylan began to take samples from the smaller plants around the grove. He knelt and placed leaves into a clear container, checking their structure through his scanner. The readings showed unusual energy within the cells, but there was no sign of poison. Leora, meanwhile, took a slow step toward the largest blossom. She could hear the hum again, steady and deep, like the sound of a faraway drum. The glowing dust seemed alive, moving in patterns that reminded her of ocean currents. She leaned forward just a little more. The petals moved. It happened so fast that Raylan barely had time to react. One moment Leora was standing, looking into the flower. The next, the petals snapped shut around her with a sudden force. She let out a short cry, muffled almost instantly as the plant's golden walls folded over her. "Leora!" Raylan shouted. He dropped his scanner and ran toward the flower. The plant was taller than him, its stem thick and strong. The petals were completely closed, forming a sealed chamber. Through the thin membrane between them, he could see Leora's outline. She was pressed tightly, struggling against the walls. The plant shuddered, its stem flexing as if it were swallowing. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground. Raylan placed his hands on the petals and pushed with all his strength. But the surface was tough, almost like a thick leather mixed with stone. The rest of the grove reacted. Around him, the other blossoms began to shift. Their petals trembled, then folded inward, as though answering the movement of the one holding Leora. The air grew thick with the sweet scent, so strong now that Raylan felt lightheaded. He forced himself to focus. He could see a faint liquid beginning to drip inside the flower, pooling at Leora's feet. It steamed slightly where it touched her boots. His heart pounded. This was no harmless blossom. This was a predator. Raylan shouted into his communicator for help. The captain's voice answered, but the signal was weak here among the plants. Still, Raylan's words were clear. Leora was trapped, and the plant was dangerous. He gritted his teeth and tried again to force the petals apart. They did not budge. His hand slid against the smooth, damp surface. The hum of the grove was now joined by a slow, rhythmic pulse from the ground, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. A vine shot out from the base of the plant, wrapping around Raylan's ankle. He kicked hard, breaking it, but another one lashed toward him. He stepped back, dodging it, his eyes never leaving the flower holding Leora inside. She was pressing her palms against the walls, her mouth moving, but he could not hear her voice. Through the thick layers of petal and stem his training told him to think, not just act. He scanned the stem with his portable device. The reading showed strong muscle-like fibers, and deep inside, a core that was pulling Leora downward. It was trying to drag her into its center, where the corrosive fluid would dissolve her completely. The thought lit a fire in him. He knew there was no time to wait for the others. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small thermal cutter, usually used for slicing through thick vines or hardened plant stems during research. He powered it on, and the blade glowed with white heat, pressing it against the petal. He heard a sharp hiss as the surface burned. The plant reacted instantly, releasing a violent tremor through its stem and snapping more vines toward him. Raylan ducked low and slashed through the nearest vine. He returned to the petal and pushed the cutter deeper. The heat seemed to weaken the outer layer, but not enough to open it completely. He cursed under his breath, knowing the blade would not hold its charge much longer. A sudden movement caught his eye. The glowing dust inside the plant had begun to move faster, swirling around Leora like a storm. The petals tightened even more, and the hum grew to a roar. Raylan knew he had only minutes. He looked up at the top of the blossom. The petals there were thinner, more delicate. If he could reach that point, maybe he could cut through more easily. Without hesitating, he climbed the stem, gripping it tight with his hands and boots. The plant shook violently, trying to throw him off, but he climbed higher until he was level with the top of the sealed petals. Here, the sunlight passed through, making the surface glow faintly. He could see Leora's head and shoulders inside, her eyes wide, her skin marked by faint burns from the fluid below. He pressed the cutter to the thin petal edge. The blade sliced through faster than before, and the plant let out a deep vibration that rattled his bones. A crack formed, just enough for a stream of cold air to rush inside. Leora's eyes met his through the gap. He shouted to her to hold on. The petals twitched, trying to close again, but the damage to the top slowed them. Below, more vines were rising from the ground, curling and whipping toward him. The grove itself seemed alive, as if all the plants were connected and fighting together. Raylan gripped the stem tighter and kept cutting, each second bringing the opening closer to being wide enough. By now, the rest of the crew was on their way, their voices faint over the communicator, but Raylan knew they might arrive too late if he stopped now. His mind was clear. This was between him, the plant, and the girl it had taken. The crack in the golden petals grew wider under the heat of Raylan's cutter. A thin stream of sticky fluid dripped out, sizzling when it touched the outer leaves. The smell was sharp and sour, mixing with the sweet scent that still filled the air. Raylan ignored the smell and focused on the task inside. Leora was still pressed tightly between the petal walls. Her arms were pinned, and she was leaning sideways to avoid the rising pool of fluid at her feet. Her wide eyes stayed locked on Raylan, but her lips moved in silent words he could not hear. The plant shuddered again, sending a wave of movement. Through its stem, Raylan's footing slipped, and he grabbed the edge of the crack to steady himself. The surface was slick, almost slimy. A vine whipped up from below, wrapping around his leg. He yanked hard, freeing himself, then returned the cutter to the crack. The blade was losing its glow. He could feel the power cell running low. With a deep breath, he pushed it into the petal with all his strength. The surface gave way, tearing. In a sudden rip, sunlight spilled into the inner chamber, and Leora flinched at the brightness. The plant reacted violently. All around the grove, other blossoms closed completely. Their stems twisted, and thick vines lashed toward Raylan like living whips. One struck his shoulder, nearly knocking him from the stem. Another tried to wrap around his waist. He swung the cutter in a wide arc, slicing through it before it could tighten. Raylan glanced down and saw that the ground below was shifting. Roots thicker than tree trunks were moving beneath the soil. They rose slightly, cracking the surface, then sank again. The plant was not just one stalk. It was part of a massive living network that covered the entire grove. Inside the cracked blossom, Leora shifted her body toward the opening. The gap was still too small for her to escape. She pressed her shoulder against it, trying to widen it from the inside, but the plant squeezed tighter, almost crushing her. Raylan shouted her name and climbed higher, straddling the top of the blossom. He reached both hands into the gap and pulled at the petal edges. The fibers resisted, but he felt them give slightly. The plant's hum had changed to a harsh, grinding vibration, as if it was warning him to stop. Suddenly, the stem bent forward, trying to throw him off. He wrapped one arm around it and hung on as the whole blossom swayed. The movement caused the fluid inside to slosh, rising almost to Leora's knees. She cried out, her voice muffled but full of fear. Raylan's pulse raced. He knew he had minutes. At best, he hooked his foot into a notch in the stem and used both hands to rip at the weakened petal seam. Piece by piece, the tear grew wider. Sunlight poured in, and the plant's reaction grew more desperate. Several vines shot up at once, some tipped with sharp thorns. One grazed his arm, cutting through his sleeve. The sting was immediate, but he ignored the pain. Another vine tried to grab the cutter from his hand. He twisted away and pressed the glowing blade deep into the petal wall one last time. The heat cut through, and the gap became wide enough for a person. Come on, he shouted, though he still could not be sure she heard him. He reached inside, grabbing Leora's arm. Her skin was slick from the fluid, but he held on tightly. She tried to push herself toward him, but the petal still clung to her sides like a giant fist. He pulled hard, feeling the muscles in his shoulders strain. The plant's fibers stretched, but refused to break completely. The stem bent again, this time toward the ground. Raylan felt the sudden drop as the blossom tilted sharply. If it threw him off, Leora would be lost. He gritted his teeth and leaned backward, using his weight to keep the gap open. The crew's voices finally reached him through the communicator. They were close, but he could not wait for them. The plant would finish its meal before they arrived. He remembered the freezing spray in his pack. One hand still holding Leora, he reached behind him and pulled out the small silver canister. Aimed at the petal seam, he pressed the trigger. A burst of white mist shot out, covering the surface in frost. The sudden change in temperature sent a shiver through the plant. Its grip loosened slightly. That's it, he muttered. He sprayed again, moving the nozzle closer to the core. The frost spread, making the fibers brittle. With one final pull, he felt the petals give way. Leora slid forward into his arms, coughing as fresh air touched her face. Before he could celebrate, a vine looped around his waist. It tightened instantly, dragging him backward toward the thicker part of the stem. He grabbed Leora tighter, tucking her close as he fought against the pull. Below, the ground writhed with movement. The other plants in the grove were leaning toward them, their vines reaching higher and faster. It was like the entire forest wanted to keep them there, Raylan swung the cutter one-handed, slicing through the vine around his waist. It snapped with a wet sound, and he pushed away from the stem. He and Leora slid down the side. Using the large leaves as ramps, twice more, vines shot at them. But he cut through both before they could wrap around them. They landed hard on the ground, stumbling but staying upright. Leora clung to his arm, breathing fast. Her legs trembled from exhaustion and shock. "Run," Raylan said. They sprinted toward the edge of the grove. The plants behind them hissed softly, and the sweet scent in the air grew stronger again, almost as if the grove was trying one last time to lure them back. When they broke through the line of tall grass, they saw the crew members running toward them with cutting tools ready. The captain was behind them, shouting orders. Raylan waved for them to keep their distance. "No one goes near those blossoms," he called out. The crew slowed, eyes widening as they looked past him at the grove. The golden petals, once beautiful, now seemed like open jaws waiting for prey. The hum had returned to its steady rhythm, as though nothing had happened, as though the plant was ready to wait for the next chance. Leora leaned against Raylan, still weak but standing. Her eyes were fixed on the grove. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "They are alive in ways we do not understand," she said. Raylan nodded. "And they are hungry." The captain ordered everyone back to the ship. They moved quickly, glancing over their shoulders. The grove stood still, yet the feeling of being watched never left them. When they reached the ship, the hatch closed behind them with a final hiss. For now, they were safe. But Raylan knew this was not the end. The plant had learned something about them today, and if they returned, it would be ready. The ship's medical bay was quiet except for the soft hum of the machines. Leora sat on the examination table, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her clothes were still damp from the plant's fluid, and faint marks covered her arms and legs where the petals had pressed to tightly. She kept her gaze on the floor, her mind replaying the moment she was pulled inside the blossom. Raylan stood nearby, speaking quietly with the captain. He described the plant's strength, its thick fibers, and the strange way the entire grove seemed connected underground. The captain listened without interrupting, her face set in a hard line. "We cannot risk losing another crew member," she said finally. "The grove will be marked as a hazard, and we will avoid it." Raylan shook his head. "That will not be enough. It is too close to our landing site. Those vines can reach farther than we think. If someone wanders near it, even by accident, they will not have a chance." The captain frowned. "You are suggesting we destroy it." "I'm saying we must," Raylan replied firmly. "That plant is a predator. It will attack again." Leora lifted her head at his words. "It is not just one plant," she said softly. "It is many, but they are all one being. I felt it when I was inside. It knew I was there. It knew you were there. It could feel us." The room fell silent for a moment. Raylan stepped closer to her. "Then we have to end it completely. Not just one blossom, the whole root system." The captain considered this, then gave a slow nod. "If we are to do it, we will do it quickly." "What is your plan?" Raylan had already been thinking about that. "The fibers are too strong for simple cutting. Fire would spread slowly through something that thick. But plants like this often react badly to sudden, extreme changes in temperature. If we combine a freezing shock with rapid heating, it could destroy the core. If the core dies, the whole network will collapse." The captain agreed, though her voice carried a note of warning. "You will not take unnecessary risks. If it becomes too dangerous, you return to the ship." An hour later, Raylan stood in the equipment bay with two crew members, preparing what they would need. He took a larger cryo spray unit, designed for freezing sections of alien plant life for study. Beside it, he set a thermal lancer tool meant for cutting through rock. The combination would be dangerous to use in close quarters, but it was their best chance. Leora entered quietly, already wearing her exploration suit. Raylan turned to her in surprise. "You should rest. I'm coming with you," she said, her voice steady. "I know what it feels like inside the plant. I can sense where its core might be." That could save time. Raylan hesitated, but could see the determination in her eyes. Finally, he handed her a small cryo spray of her own. "Stay behind me. If it goes wrong, you run." The crew moved out in pairs toward the grove. The air seemed heavier as they approached, the sweet scent growing stronger. The golden blossoms swayed gently. Though there was no wind, their hum rose and fell in a slow rhythm, like breathing. Raylan stopped at the edge and studied the plants. The largest blossom was still there. Its petals repaired where he had cut through them. The damage was faint now, as if the plant had healed itself. That alone made his stomach tighten. Leora, he said quietly, "Do you feel it?" She closed her eyes for a moment. "Yes, the center is deeper in, under the largest blossom, straight down. It is bigger than I thought. The roots spread far." Raylan checked his equipment. The others stayed at the perimeter, ready to assist if vines attacked. Then he and Leora stepped into the grove. Immediately, the hum grew louder. The stems leaned slightly toward them. A vine uncoiled from the base of one blossom, testing the air as if sensing their heat. Raylan kept his eyes forward and moved quickly, knowing the plants would strike the moment they were close enough. They reached the center. The ground here felt different, soft, but with a faint vibration beneath it. Raylan knelt, placing the thermal lance against the soil. With a spark and a hiss, it cut through the surface, sending a narrow column of heat deep into the ground. Steam rose instantly, and the scent of burned roots filled the air. The plants reacted at once. Vines lashed out from all directions. One wrapped around Leora's arm, and she yanked free, spraying it with the cryo spray. The frost spread, and the vine dropped, stiff and brittle. Another vine struck at Raylan's shoulder, but he ducked and drove the thermal lance deeper. The hum shifted to a harsh, urgent vibration. The petals of every blossom in the grove began to fold inward, as if closing for protection. The ground under Raylan's boots shook. "Now," Leora said sharply, "use the cold." Raylan grabbed the large cryo spray and aimed it into the same hole the lance had made. A rush of icy mist poured down, filling the tunnel with frost. The sudden temperature change cracked the surrounding ground. The roots beneath writhed like living snakes. The reaction was immediate. The largest blossom tilted violently, and a deep, rumbling sound came from below. Vines flailed in every direction, knocking over smaller plants nearby. Raylan sprayed again, keeping the cold focused on the core. One vine wrapped around his waist, pulling him back. Leora leapt forward, blasting the vine with her cryo spray until it released him. The ground split open just a meter away, revealing thick, pale roots twisting in pain. "Finish it," she shouted. Raylan switched back to the thermal lance, driving the heated tip directly into the frozen roots. The sudden shock sent cracks racing along their surface. A blinding white steam burst out, and the hum of the grove broke into sharp, irregular bursts. The blossoms around them began to collapse, petals shriveled, stems bent, and the golden glow faded. The sweet scent vanished, replaced by the smell of burned plant matter. But the fight was not over. The largest blossom remained upright, though its petals were curling inward. Its vines shot forward in a final attack. One struck Raylan's side, knocking the wind from him. Another wrapped around Leora's leg, dragging her toward the base. Raylan forced himself to his feet, grabbed the cryo spray, and emptied it into the blossom's base. The frost climbed rapidly up the stem, freezing it solid. With one last swing, he drove the thermal lance into the center. The stem cracked from top to bottom, and the blossom collapsed, its golden petals turning dull and lifeless. The vibrations beneath the ground faded to nothing. The grove was silent. Raylan stood breathing hard, his suit marked with cuts and frost. Leora limped slightly but managed a small, relieved smile around them. The other crew members approached carefully, scanning the area to confirm no movement remained. "It is over," Leora said softly. Raylan looked at the withered plants and the scorched ground. "Yes, but we will mark this place forever. No one should forget what was here." They turned back toward the ship, leaving the dead grove behind. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the field, for the first time since they landed. The air felt clear, and the planet's beauty seemed peaceful again. The grove lay silent after the battle, its golden flowers now dark and lifeless. But Raylan could not shake the uneasy feeling in his chest. He kept glancing over his shoulder as they walked back toward the ship. Leora noticed. "You think it is still alive?" she said quietly. I think, he replied, that we only hurt it, not killed it. The captain, walking ahead, turned at his words. We saw it collapse. The readings show no movement underground. Raylan slowed his steps. If the roots go deeper than our scans can reach, the core might still be alive. If it recovers, it will grow again. We have to be sure. There was a long pause. The captain frowned. What do you suggest? I will go down, Raylan said, firmly, into the root chamber. I will see the core myself. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. No one wanted to volunteer for such a task. The plant's underground network was unknown and could be far more dangerous than the surface. But Raylan's voice carried no hesitation. The captain finally nodded. You have 1 hour. If you do not return, we will pull you out by force. Back at the grove, Raylan chose the spot where the largest blossom had fallen. The ground there was already cracked from the earlier attack. With a hand tool, he began clearing away soil until the pale, frozen roots showed again. Leora appeared at his side, holding a coil of climbing line. You will need this, she said. He took it without argument, fastening it to his belt. You stay here and watch the perimeter. If I do not come back when I should, cut the rope and seal the entrance. Leora shook her head. If you are not back, I'm going in after you. He gave a short, grim smile. Then I will make sure to come back. The others anchored the rope to a thick piece of ship equipment, then stepped back. Raylan took a deep breath and lowered himself into the opening. The air grew cooler as he descended. The roots around him were thick and smooth, their pale surfaces glistening faintly. A faint, slow vibration moved through them, like a heartbeat far below. The shaft widened into a tunnel. Raylan switched on his helmet light. The beam revealed more roots snaking along the walls and ceiling. Drops of water slid down their surfaces, and now and then a faint pulse of light moved through them, as if something was flowing inside. The deeper he went, the stronger the vibration became. It was not the steady hum from before, but a slow, irregular throb. It almost felt angry. After several minutes, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. Here the roots were massive, some as thick as tree trunks, and the center of the space was a shape unlike the rest. It was a large bulb-like structure, dark green with streaks of gold. Its surface rose and fell slowly, like breathing. Raylan knew immediately this was the core. He approached carefully, scanning it with his wrist device. The readings showed faint life signs. It was badly damaged but far from dead. Already new tendrils were forming along its sides. If it recovered, the grove would return in time. He reached for the cryo spray, but before he could aim, the ground beneath his feet shifted. Thin roots erupted upward, wrapping around his legs. He stumbled but managed to keep hold of the spray. He blasted the roots with a jet of frost, breaking them free. The core reacted violently. A sharp pulse of light shot through the chamber, and the surrounding roots quivered. From the walls, more vines uncoiled. Reaching toward him, Raylan pulled out the thermal lance. Igniting its bright tip, he drove it into the side of the core. The smell of burning plant filled the air, and the core let out a low, rumbling sound that shook the chamber. The vines struck harder. One wrapped around his arm, pulling him away from the lance. Another caught his waist, squeezing tightly. His breath caught in his chest as the pressure increased. Above, Leora heard the muffled thuds through the robe. She gripped the line, feeling the sudden jerks. Her heart pounded. Something is wrong, she said to the crew. Below, Raylan fought to free himself. He managed to twist the thermal lance and slash the vine on his arm. It fell limp, but the one around his waist tightened again. He dropped the lance, grabbed the cryo spray, and fired directly at the vine. Ice spread along it, and it cracked apart. He dug for the lance and drove it deep into the core, right beside the first burn. The chamber filled with steam as the frozen tissue inside met the intense heat. The core convulsed, sending a wave of movement through every root in the room. The vines thrashed wildly, smashing against the walls. Raylan ducked and rolled, trying to avoid them. He kept the lance in place, holding it steady even as his arms trembled from the effort. Suddenly, the rope at his waist went tight. Someone was pulling him up. Not yet, he muttered. But the pull grew strong or died. It was Leora. She had clipped herself to the rope and was climbing down. Moments later, her light shone into the chamber. She saw Raylan struggling and ran to his side, dodging the flailing vines. "Help me hold it," he shouted, nodding to the lance. Together, they pressed it deeper into the core. The golden streaks on its surface began to fade to gray. The breathing slowed, then stopped. The vines went still. Raylan yanked the lance free, and the two of them stepped back. The core sagged inward, its surface collapsing. A dull cracking sound came from inside as the tissue froze and split apart. "It is finished," Leora said, breathing hard. They did not waste time. Both climbed back up the rope, their suits marked with dirt and frost. When they reached the surface, the crew pulled them out and stepped back from the hole. Raylan looked at the dead grove. "Now it is over." The captain glanced at the withered remains of the largest blossom. "We will seal the shaft and burn what is left. No one will come here again." As the crew began their work, Raylan and Leora stood together at the edge of the grove. The air was cool, the sweet scent gone. The danger had passed, but both knew they would remember the sound of that slow, angry heartbeat for the rest of their lives. The grove was sealed. The crew had burned the fallen flowers and poured a layer of hardened alloy over the shaft leading to the core. Raylan watched the smoke rise into the pale sky and felt the weight of exhaustion press down on him. It was finally over, or so he believed. The ship lifted off from the grove site and began its slow journey back to the research station on the far side of the continent. The journey would take several hours. Most of the crew rested in silence. Still shaken by the fight underground, Leora sat near the viewport, her gaze fixed on the endless stretches of strange alien forest passing below. Halfway through the flight, the ship's sensor officer spoke suddenly. "Captain, I'm picking up strange readings from the northern valley." The captain frowned. "What kind of readings?" "Similar to the energy pulses we detected from the grove before the attack." "Very similar. Same rhythm, same faint heat. Signature." Raylan leaned forward. "How far?" "Less than 100 kilometers from the research station." The captain's face hardened. "Show me." The viewport display shifted to show an overhead scan of the valley. At first it looked like nothing unusual, just rolling hills and patches of dense forest. But at the center of the image, a large circular area pulsed faintly, like the slow beat of a living heart. "That is another one," Raylan said quietly. "Could be." The sensor officer replied, "Or it could be something else entirely." The captain did not like uncertainty. "We cannot risk it. If there is another plant core so close to the station, it could threaten everyone there. We will divert and investigate." The ship changed course. The engine's hum grew louder, and the crew prepared for landing. Raylan checked his gear again: thermal lance, cryo spray, side cutter. Leora did the same. Neither spoke much. Both knew that if the valley held another grove, the fight would be worse than before. The ship landed on a flat ridge overlooking the valley from above. The center of the strange pulse was a small open clearing, surrounded by twisted, pale-leafed trees. But unlike the first grove, there were no golden flowers here. The clearing seemed quiet and lifeless. "It looks empty," Leora said, her voice low. "That is what worries me," Raylan replied. They moved down into the valley, their boots crunching on dry soil. The air felt heavy, as though it carried some hidden weight. Birds or creatures like them were absent. Not even an insect stirred. When they reached the clearing, they found the ground covered in thin, brittle vines, all gray-white and dry. They looked dead, but Raylan knelt to touch one. It was cold, but as his hand rested on it, a faint vibration ran through the vine. "They are not dead," he said. The captain signaled the team to spread out and scan the area. As the crew worked, Raylan noticed something odd. All the vines in the clearing led toward a single point in the center, where a cluster of stones jutted from the ground. They were smooth and strangely warm, as though the sun had been shining directly on them. Though the valley was in shade, Leora came to stand beside him. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "Yes. It is like something is sleeping under there." Before either could move, the stones shifted. Slowly, They sank into the earth as if being pulled down. A deep rumbling sound spread through the ground. The brittle vines began to twist and grow, their color changing from gray to pale green. "Back to the ship," the captain ordered, but it was already too late. The ground split open in the middle of the clearing, and something huge began to rise. At first, it looked like a thick pillar of roots, twisting together as they emerged. But as more of it appeared, the shape widened and opened into something like a great flower bud. Its petals were not soft, they were like sheets of living metal, veined with glowing lines of gold. "This is not the same as before," Raylan said. Stepping back, the bud opened with a slow, grinding sound. Inside was a dark, hollow space, and from it came a low hum that made the air tremble. A single vine shot outward, striking the ground near the crew. The impact left a small crater. The captain drew his sidearm. "Weapons ready. Do not let it touch you." More vines lashed out, some as thick as a person's leg. The crew scattered, firing at them, but the vines were fast. One wrapped around a soldier's weapon, pulling it from his hands and tossing it aside. Raylan and Leora moved together toward the base of the bud. "We cannot fight all of it up here," Raylan said. "We have to find the core and destroy it before it grows." They dodged another sweeping vine and reached the edge of the opening in the ground. Without hesitation, they slid inside, using the tangled roots as handholds. The air below was damp and smelled of soil and sap. It was darker than the first grove's tunnels, and the roots here seemed denser, harder. The vibration in the walls was stronger, almost deafening. Leora's leg caught movement, a head-thin tendril slipping away into the shadows. They followed the vibration until they reached a chamber unlike any they had seen before. The core here was not a simple bulb, it was shaped like a sphere suspended in a web of roots, rotating slowly. Gold light pulsed across its surface in complex patterns, like veins of molten metal. "It is bigger," Leora said in awe, "and probably stronger." Raylan added grimly. They approached carefully, but the sphere reacted. Vines shot from the walls, faster than before. One caught Raylan's leg and pulled hard. He slashed it with his cutter. But more came. Leora fired the cryo spray, freezing to vines before they could reach them. "We need to hit it from both sides," Raylan said. They split, circling the core. Raylan drove his lance into one side, the metal tip glowing bright. The sphere shuddered and spun faster. Leora aimed the cryo spray at the opposite side, covering it in frost. Steam filled the chamber as heat and cold met. The vines went wild, striking at them in rapid bursts. Raylan took a heavy hit to his shoulder, knocking him against the wall, but he forced himself up. Leora slipped on the wet ground, barely avoiding a strike. They pressed the attack. Lance and cryo spray working together, cracks began to form on the sphere's surface, spreading wider with each second. The golden light inside dimmed. With a sharp, echoing crack, the sphere split open. A rush of cold air swept through the chamber, and the vines froze in place. Pieces of the core crumbled, falling like shards of glass. It was over again, at least for now. They climbed back to the surface, where the captain and the remaining crew were still fighting off the last of the above ground vines. Once the cores' destruction reached them, the vines fell limp, curling inward as if retreating into death. Raylan looked around the quiet valley. "If there are two, there could be more," he said. The captain's eyes narrowed. "Then we find every one of them before they wake." The crew began preparing to scan the planet more deeply, but in the back of Raylan's mind, one thought would not go away. The first grove had flowers. The second had metal petals. Whatever. They were not all the same, and some might be far more dangerous than the ones they had already faced. After destroying the second core, the crew returned to the research station. The air felt lighter there, but no one truly relaxed. The memory of the valley and the strange metal petals stayed fresh in their minds. The captain ordered constant scans of the entire continent. Huge arrays on the station roof began sweeping the skies and land, searching for more energy pulses. The results came in slowly, and the data made the crew uneasy. There are at least 6 more pulse signatures scattered across the planet, the sensor officer reported in the meeting room. "Some weak, some strong. One of them is deep in the Southern Ocean. Another is inside the mountains far to the east. Leora tapped the map on the table. They are not all on the surface. Some are buried deep underground. Raylan studied the readings. The second grove was stronger than the first, if each one is different. The deeper ones might be worse. The captain nodded. We need to know what they are before we destroy them. This planet may be hiding more than we think. To gather more data, the crew launched small drones to fly over and beneath the planet's crust. One deep-sea drone entered the Southern Ocean, its cameras showing dark waters and strange glowing currents. In the mountain region, another drone drilled into rock, sending back images of giant root structures fossilized in stone yet faintly pulsing. Leora noticed something strange in the deep-sea images. The roots here are moving, but not toward the surface. They are growing down into the crust. That makes no sense, the captain said. It does if the true source is deeper, Raylan replied. 2 days later, the station picked up an unexpected signal. It was not a natural energy pulse, but a pattern-sharp burst of sound, repeating in regular intervals. The signal came from far below the crust, deeper than any root could reach. The crew gathered in the control room to listen. The sound was not a voice, but it felt almost alive, a soft hum, then 3 sharp tones. Then silence, repeating over and over. What is it saying? The captain asked. The station's linguist shook her head. It is not any language I know, but the pattern is too precise to be random. It might be a kind of warning or a call. The thought of something calling from deep underground made the room colder. The captain made a decision. We are going down there. The crew prepared the drifter, a heavy descent craft designed for high-pressure environments. It carried drills, scanners, and sealed cabins. Raylan, Leora, the captain, and 4 others boarded it. As the craft drilled downward, the walls groaned under the heat and pressure. At first, they passed layers of rock and crystal. Then the scanners began picking up strange materials, metal veins twisted into root-like shapes. They were not natural minerals. The patterns matched the alloy petals from the second grove. After many hours, the drill broke through into a vast, hollow space. The drifter's lights revealed a cavern so large that the beams could not find the far walls. The floor shimmered with reflective pools, and from those pools rose enormous pillars of metal and root fused together. In the center of the cavern stood something massive, half plant, half machine. It was shaped like a tree, but its trunk was made of dark alloy. Thick roots spread into the pools, and its branches were hung with crystal-like pods glowing faintly. The repeating signal came from the base of this great structure. The sound vibrated through the walls and floor. This is it, Leora whispered. The heart of all of them. The captain's voice was tense. If we destroy this, maybe we stop all the groves at once. Raylan shook his head. Or we wake. Something even worse. Look at it. It is not sleeping. It is working. Maybe repairing itself. Maybe building more. They moved closer, stepping carefully across the slick ground. The air was warm and thick. The tree machine reacted as they approached. The crystal pods began to pulse faster, and thin tendrils slid down from the branches. The crew raised their weapons. Suddenly, the sound pattern changed. It was no longer 3 sharp tones. Now it was a rapid sequence, almost urgent. The linguist's voice crackled over the comms from the station above. The signal changed. It is transmitting upward now, toward orbit. Raylan's stomach tightened. It is calling for something from space. Before the captain could reply, the cavern ceiling trembled. Dust and small rocks fell. The great trees glow brightened, and deep in the pools, shapes began to move. The shapes rose, giant forms made of root and metal, each the size of the drifter. They were not plants. They looked like machines designed to protect the tree. Their heads were smooth domes, and their limbs ended in sharp, jointed claws. The captain's order was sharp. Back to the craft now. They ran, the sound of metal, claws striking stone behind them. One guardian leapt over a pool, landing with a shattering crash in their path. Raylan fired the thermal lance at its leg. Melting through the joint, the machine staggered but did not fall. Leora used the cryo spray on another, freezing part of its chest. but it shattered the ice and kept coming. The drifter's hatch was in sight. The crew dove inside as the machines closed in. The captain hit the controls, and the craft's drills roared to life, biting back into the rock above Dot as they rose. The scanners showed movement spreading through the cavern. The Guardians did not follow far, but the great tree's glow was spreading up the root networks. Back at the station, the crew gathered again. The linguist looked pale. "I think I understand part of the signal." It was not a warning. It was a location mark, something telling an outside receiver where to find this planet. The captain stared at the display showing the planet's orbit. So whatever built that thing, it might be coming. Raylan looked at the map of the remaining pulse points on the planet. If that is true, we have two choices: destroy all of them before the signal is answered, or be here when something arrives. Silence filled the room. Outside the station, the alien farce swayed in a wind that carried no comfort. The second choice might mean war with something far beyond their understanding. But the first choice would mean attacking the planet itself, tearing out whatever these cores were, risking damage they could not predict for now. The captain ordered both preparations to begin. The scanners would map every root network. The drifter would be refitted for deeper assaults, and above them, in the cold darkness of space, something might already be on its way.